I have to say, preparing for this flower communion renewed my feelings of affection for this congregation and all the things that people do and are willing to contribute when you ask them for a little bit of help. Um, Everybody that we asked for anything just went beyond, and I think it has made for a fairly special flower communion. So I hope you enjoy it. I'd especially like to call out Scott Rodman, who took most of the videos that you will see in the next session. So take it away, Scott.
We produce videos for this service as a means to remind us of that sense of sharing in our community when we were physically in our church and were able to bring in our flowers and their stories and share them with each other. Our first video is Barbara Lucas. Barbara Lucas should be recognized as Open Circle's flower maestro. Every week, without fail, when we have met in church, she comes up with exciting and delightful flower arrangements to grace our sacred space.
People from a planet without flowers would think we must be mad with joy the whole time to have such things about us. So wrote Iris Murdoch, Irish-born author and philosopher whose own name means faith, hope, and wisdom. When Dr. Norbert Chapek created the Flower Communion, one of the few uniquely Unitarian Universalist ceremonies our denomination claims, he chose a symbol even more powerful than he perhaps may have realized. People the world over use flowers as national symbols. For example, the daffodil for Wales and the red rose for England. They use flowers as personal adornment and incorporate them into a wide variety of ceremonies, rituals, and celebrations. Poets and philosophers write about them. For me, flowers and sacred space are inextricably linked, which is why flowers in the sanctuary are a big part of the spiritual uplift I expect to find there on Sunday mornings. Inviting each member of our UU congregations to contribute a flower to a communal vase for the flower communion is a very meaningful gesture and a colourful visual symbol of our togetherness in diversity. The different varieties of blooms, their shapes, sizes, colours and textures, representative of the individual attributes, characteristics and contributions we each bring to our faith home. For as journalist William Safire wrote, "No one flower can ever symbolize this nation. America is a bouquet." I would like to leave you with some words of the poet Khalil Gibran, taken from his poem Song of the Flower, number 23. It is the voice of the flower that speaks. I am the daughter of the elements with whom winter conceived. I was reared in the lap of summer, and I slept in the bed of autumn. The plains are decorated with my beautiful colours, and the air is scented with my fragrance. I drink dew for wine and hearken to the voices of the birds and dance to the rhythmic swaying of the grass. I am the lover's gift. I am the wedding wreath. I am the memory of a moment of happiness. I am the last gift of the living to the dead. I am a part of joy and a part of sorrow. But I look up high to see only the light, and never look down to see my shadow. This is wisdom which man must learn.
Margaret Jarrick is a descendant of the Anishinaabe Nation. As a member of our church, she is a living presence and reminder that we live on the land that was taken from the first peoples who inhabited what they called Turtle Island.
Respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are a part is one of our Unitarian 7 principles, but it's also foundation to our philosophy as Native Americans and First Peoples in our relationship to our environment. My ancestors were Anishinaabe from northern America, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Canada, the concept that was basic to our philosophy was the concept of the interdependence of the web of life, in which all things were related to one another. The Unitarians, the Unitarian Fellowship also embraces that concept of the web of life, the sacredness of the web of life, the interconnectedness of all life. We had what we called the Three Sisters. They were plants that were fundamental to our diets. They were the beans, the corn, and the squash. And we call them the Three Sisters because they grew in a way that was dependent on one another, with the corn providing a place for the beans to climb, and the squash providing shade around the bottom, shading of the roots of the other plants. So we planted them together. I'd like to tell you about the Aztecs of Mexico City. Even though they were probably one of the most violent of all the tribes of the New World, they had an incredible passion for the beauty of flowers. And while their streets may have run red with the blood of their victims, there were flowers blooming in every nook and cranny where you could possibly grow a flower. Maybe they did well because of all of the fertilizer that they got. But all of the tribes of North America had a very special and personal relationship with the world of plants. And we called them our sisters and brothers. They provided us with food, with clothing, with shelter, and actually were there to fill all of our needs. So we never took any of them for granted or said, oh, that's just a dumb weed. Every plant had significance. Every plant had a place in the world that we lived in. Respect.
John Morris is a professor of chemistry at Marian University here in Fond du Lac. He will share a scientist's perspective on the importance of plants and their place in the web of existence.
Breathe in, bring in that life-sustaining oxygen. Breathe out, exhale the carbon dioxide we produced. This wouldn't have been possible a long time ago. The Earth's early atmosphere didn't have any oxygen in it, and it contained 25 to 50% carbon dioxide. And then about 3 billion years ago, miracle of photosynthesis happened, where green plants were able to take carbon dioxide and water and use the power of the sun to produce glucose and oxygen. So now, 20% of our atmosphere is oxygen, and it's all come from plants, and the carbon dioxide level has been reduced to the safe level of 0.04%. Nice bit of evidence for this happening is the creation of the banded iron formations. As oxygen became plentiful, it would react with dissolved iron in the water and precipitate as rust, and we get these beautiful banded iron formations.
Among open circle
And then 200 million years ago, flowering plants evolved. And I thought I would share with you a little excerpt from Michael Pollan's The Botany of Desire, to share again the importance of flowering plants to us. Once upon a time, there were no flowers. 200 million years ago, be only slightly more precise. The world before flowers was sleepier than ours because, lacking fruit and large seeds, it can support many warm-blooded creatures. Reptiles ruled, and life slowed to a crawl whenever it got cold. What'll happen at night? It was a plainer-looking world too, greener even than it is now, absent all the colors and patterns, not to mention scents, that flowers and fruits would bring into it. Beauty did not yet exist. That is, the way things looked had nothing to do with desire. Flowers changed everything. The angiosperms, as botanists called the plants that form flowers and then encase seeds, appeared during the Cretaceous period. The evolution of plants proceeded according to a new motive force, attraction between different species. Now, natural selection favored blooms that could rivet the attention of pollinators, fruits that appealed to foragers. The desires of other creatures became paramount in the evolution of plants for the simple reason that the plants that succeeded at gratifying those desires wound up with more offspring. Beauty had emerged as a survival strategy. With flowers came fruit and seeds, and these too remade life on Earth. By producing sugars and proteins to entice animals to disperse their seed, the angiosperms multiplied the world's supply of food energy, making possible the rise of large, warm-blooded animals. Without flowers, the reptiles, which had gotten along fine in a leafy, fruitless world, would probably still rule. Without flowers, we would not be. Happy Flower Communion.
Thank you, John. Among Open Circles Fellowship, we have lots of green thumbs. I'm sure that's the same with our churches that are with us today. This video is a glimpse of what their gardens look like, with highlights of their favorite flowers, which they so proudly talk about.
I'm here in our garden with bleeding hearts and allium, both of which are perennials. They bloom at this time of the year. This is called prairie smoke. It's an early bloomer in the spring, and it's already starting to go to seed, as you can see. It's kind of this little smoky look to it. It's a native plant.
These are called Dame's rockets. They're also a wild phlox. They were Marie Antoinette's favorite flower and were probably brought over here by the early French settlers since they are not a native plant.
This is a purple iris. It blooms every year in May. We have 4 plantings on our property, and it turns out that this is Karen's favorite flower.
Mayapple is a shade-loving plant. It's a native and it's blooming right now. Usually you find this in the woods.
This bush is called the Weigela. It's very prolific. It produces these beautiful pink and white flowers, and there's a very nice aroma coming off of it. It's also a wonderful source of pollen for these bees. They're just swarming all around us right now, and I'm sure it's contributing a great deal to the pollination process.
This is an Oakfield juniper. It's known as a good Wisconsin native plant, and it's known for protecting certain critters, particularly birds will crawl underneath this during inclement weather, and it's been a really good plant here in our property.
These are sweethearts.
And these are Siberian irises, planted by our friend Mary Aragoni. This is wild geranium. It's a native plant, and it's a great ground cover. As you can see, it's blooming now, and it'll probably be going to seed in a couple of weeks.
Okay, this bush is called a Korean lilac. We've had it here for about 6 years now. It blooms very productively every year, and the blooms last for about 3 weeks. You all know what this is. These are daisies. You've probably seen them many places.
BJ tells me that this flower's name is Pink, but I'm sorry, it's fuchsia.
These bushes that are surrounding me right now are in full bloom. It's called bridal veil, and they're very beautiful this time of year. I have a little concern though, because I think they're starting to grow around my legs, so I'm not sure I'll be able to get out of here again.
Cranesbill. The seed pods resemble the bill of a crane, which is how they got their name. They are a common wildflower.
This plant here is called lamb's ear. It grows in small clumps like this, and we've got a number of them throughout our flower beds, and they're really a great addition because they're quite a contrast to the darker greens that we see so often.
This is a pagoda dogwood. It's a native. There are several different types of dogwoods that are native, the rosier dogwood, the gray dogwood. This is a lovely understory tree.
This garlic I planted last fall. It may look alike a lot, but it has many healing benefits. We use it in many different foods.
This is one of 4 different kinds of lilac that we have on our property. This particular plant is one of our newest. It was only planted about 3 years ago.
So Dan and BJ convinced me to lay down here and tell you about the bullwinkle. Which
Scott,
is what?
Scott, no, it's not bullwinkle. Periwinkle.
That's what I said. Oh, the periwinkle, and it's really nice.
This is an iris plant. It blooms in late May to early June. It has a wonderful lemony fragrance to it, and it actually came from the garden of a friend that has since moved away. So every time I look at it, I think of her.
This is a sweet little coral bell plant. One of several varieties of coral bells we have in the yard. They'll bloom for several weeks.
Shooting star is a lovely native plant. It likes part sun, part shade. It goes really well with other plants like this beautiful maidenhair fern.
This is a mountain bluet. It's a perennial, and it's in its own little corner of the yard.
Hasta la vista, baby.
So wasn't that wonderful? I just really loved that. If we were doing what we did for our flower communion virtually is that we asked people to bring a flower to share and show, and have people get into small breakout sessions to share with a couple other people. What we would have done in person is everyone would pick a flower and bring that in, and then it's a beautiful bouquet. And then at the end of the service, you would get to go up and pick a flower that someone else brought. So for those of you who are watching this as a recording, if you want to make this more meaningful, you could pick a flower and really think about it. You know, why did you pick this flower? And then think about what flower would you bring home if you were actually at a service like this. What would you like to go up there and get to pick and bring home from that beautiful bouquet? And then another thing you could think about is, what are there kind of a certain category or type of or theme of flowers that are especially meaningful to you or that you especially like? So I'm going to model this. And by the way, you could find somebody, maybe family or friend, who you'd want to do this together with too. That'd be another option. So you can see here, I have a peony, and this is actually from a friend's garden, and very beautiful, and it smells really wonderful. I wish you had, scratched the screen, you could smell this. Just gorgeous. And the peony is very meaningful to me. I do have peonies in my own yard, and they're getting a little past, so it's a good thing that I had a friend who has some peonies. But when I moved into my own home after a divorce, it was very meaningful to me that there were peonies there, because when I grew up, my mother grew peonies, and you probably can't see too well, but I have her wedding picture back there. And they remind me of her. I am, just always astounded by their beauty. They're rather fleeting. There's other flowers and bushes that stick around a lot longer. So I think that's also very important symbolically to remember. So this is definitely one of my favorite flowers. And if we were in person at the flower communion and I got to be one of the early people to pick a flower, I would pick a bearded iris. And usually if it's the right time of the year for the flower communion, at least one person brings a really showy, gorgeous bearded iris. And I love all kinds of flowers. I even like, dandelions and so on. They don't have to be that fancy for me to like them. But there's just something so showy and glorious about the bearded iris. So that's what I would bring home, and that I don't have in my yard. So so I would enjoy it that way. And if I try to think of a particular type or category or theme of flowers, it's a little bit hard for me to do that because I just really like flowers in general. But I guess it would be the fragrant ones. That's, I think, what I would pick. So I hope you've enjoyed this little virtual flower communion, and I really hope that you will do something a little bit like this. Flowers are such a gift, and I really think it's important to appreciate them and understand how meaningful they are.